I now have the Diehl fan disassembled on the workbench, and it appears that it had some repairs probably in the late 70s or so. And I always like to check out other people's repair jobs when I see evidence of repairs, just to make sure they meet up with my quality standards. And this one wasn't too bad. I took the bottom off, and inside of there is the variable transformer for the speed control. It did a pretty neat job of wiring the power cord, but it's that old rubber cable that gets brittle. You can see that the insulation was already flaking off of it. And the goal with all the work I do is to try to prevent trouble and to make sure that these devices can go back into a full-time service capacity. Because while something may work at first glance, it may look like it's okay, there may be problems that if the device is put back into active service and used a lot, there may be problems that show up, and we really want to try and prevent trouble like that. And when I was a kid, I was using an amplifier that had a power cord like this, and it was working okay, but one day I had a short in it, and the wires inside the cable, the insulation flaked off on them, and they shorted out inside the cable. So I always like to replace this old brittle cable. And so I'm going to put some terminal lugs on some new power cable to wire up to the auto transformer. I'm going to vacuum and clean this off. Someone also replaced the wire going up to the motor from the base. And I'm going to improve the insulation here with heat shrink tubing. I'm going to run heat shrink tubing all the way down to the core, and then insulate the splice with heat shrink tubing as well. Because when you see black tape, you don't know what kind of a splice job was done in there and what kind of a tape job. I don't even use black tape anymore, except in very rare cases. Heat shrink tubing does a lot neater job of insulating. So I'm going to first, I may try and find some black cable to hook up to that motor up there just to make it look more authentic. They used a brown cord here for that purpose. So I'll go ahead and get the cables made up. What I had to do to get at the motor was to remove the bolts on the back, and there's some bolts on the bottom of the rear bell housing. And then there was the bracket here that has the carrying handle that goes around the outside of the motor, and that bolts on at the bottom. I set the rear bearing housing just down here in the trash can in case any oil leaked out of it. It wouldn't make a mess. I'm going to try and clean that out too. It's got some gummy grease in it. I got it going pretty good by adding oil, but I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and clean it some more now while I've got it taken apart. Now I've got the heat shrink tubing on and the new motor cable hooked up. I ran the heat shrink tubing up as close as I could get to the winding core and put 2 layers over the connection. The previous repair technician had soldered the joints, but they just used black tape on them. And it's hard to get black tape all the way around those old cloth-covered wires. So now I'm going to run this. I put the new black cable on. I'm going to run this out to the back of the motor, and then hook it up to the auto transformer. I've got the new power cable hooked up. Got the ground terminal grounded to the chassis and the hot lead hooked up to it. Now I've got the rear bearing put back on. There's an oiling wick I had to remove in order to get the bearing back on. You can see it here. It's got a spring and it goes into this hole right here. And so I had to remove that so I could get the bearing on. So I got the cable connections made. Now I'll go ahead and start putting the top part of the fan back together. Now I've got everything rewired. Got the top part of the fan put back together. So I'm ready to put the base on now and test it. Here's the completed fan. Got the new cable going up to the motor and the new power cord on it. There's the high speed.